The documentary If a Tree Falls explores the motives behind the ELF, or Earth Liberation Front. The aim of the film is to humanize the people who have been labeled terrorists through this movement. One powerful scene in the film is when Danny, having been released from house arrest on good behavior, explains the heartbreak he feels when walking the streets of New York City, given that he shares the same sweeping identity as the men who bombed the Twin Towers. The film also includes reactionary scenes of police brutality to prove why many activists feel like they can no longer work within the system. The film communicates this message through the theme of passion. Danny did not grow up a radical environmentalist. However, after learning more about the destruction occurring globally, he commented, "I feel like I've been in perpetual mourning ever since I took the blinders off." This theme of passion helps to make Danny more than some cold mugshot. As Michael Carolan mentions in his book, Society and the Environment, the effect of environmentalism is a potentially powerful mediating factor, as it often leads to real policy change. However, when environmentalism becomes radicalized, people tend to focus on the destruction rather than the message, as Danny mentioned in analyzing the impact of the ELF movement. The film did a good job of interviewing activists as well as employees at big businesses to show the impact of the ELF on both sides. However, as Derrick Jensen mentions in his book, What We Leave Behind, the media often spreads a less than favorable image of activism. Specifically, he suggests the message being imparted is that activism is lonely. Given that the ELF individuals take action and suffer consequences alone, the film does little to dispel this idea. Chasing Ice, a documentary that explores the life work of James Balog, aims to illustrate the urgency of climate change through visual evidence. Balog understood that statistics are not always sufficient for climate change skeptics, and that we must appeal to these people in thoughtful ways. According to a survey published by the Yale Project in 2015, cited in Michael Carolan's book Society and the Environment, only 18% of Americans do not believe in climate change. Despite this somewhat hopeful statistic, only 11% say that they are very worried about it. I believe that this documentary intends to augment that percentage. James Balog decided to focus his project on ice rather than gory hunting photographs because he understood that these images were more seductive. This made me consider why I was drawn to Catching Ice rather than some other environmental documentary focused on more brutal content. Memory is the most pervasive theme in the movie. Balog explains that, through his work, he is storing forgotten landscapes. The film also explores the complexity of art, given that his photographs are both insanely beautiful but also devastating. The film did a good job demonstrating just how quickly the glaciers have been melting through several time-lapse montages. However, while the film explained the urgency of glacial melting, particularly through the calving footage, it did not relate glaciers to the larger scope of climate change as well as I had hoped. Both films followed the evolution of a movement, whether that be rapid or gradual. In the case of If a Tree Falls, the efforts of these activists began with campouts, protests, sit-ins, and building blockades. However, as they responded to those in power, namely the police force and big businesses like Superior Lumber, the group was compelled to act. Similarly, the film Chasing Ice unveils the melting of glaciers through the medium of photography. However, this evolution is nothing short of instantaneous. The one scene when the two young film members caught the largest glacial calving on film, which endured for 75 minutes, shocks viewers in a way that statistics on a page never could. Both films also showed family when telling the stories of Danny and James. Through interviews with their family members, we were able to understand that their personal quests were driven by something much larger than self-interest, given how much they were willing to sacrifice. These two people, although very different in action, were hoping to make a global impact. There are many glaring differences among the two films. If a Tree Falls focused almost entirely on human action, or activism, whereas Catching Ice focused entirely on nature. As James Balog mentioned in an early interview, however, we cannot dissociate these two things, given that humans rely entirely on nature.